let's jump in with some technical directions for OpenVMS, because that's kind of what my job is. So I should probably spend a few minutes talking about that as well. Um, who, let's put it away, who knows it by heart by now? VSI employees excluded. No, you've all seen it, and I think you've, over the course of this week, you've probably come to appreciate what we mean when we say that we link the past to the future and that we want to protect your application investments. It's really all about continuity, about making progress, about looking towards the future and moving closer to that without being too disruptive that we break everything that you've built over the last decades. So I want to look back a little bit about where we have come from, not only as a company, but, well, yes, mostly as a company. I want to talk to you about our product organization, because that's something that's still relatively new. We started that last year. And then some technical directions. And rather than like bore you to death with slideshows that only have like roadmaps and whole lists of products and things like that, I want to try to give you some bit of insight into the process that we use to arrive at these decisions, the things that drive us, and then you can go to our website and read our boring roadmap there. But before I do that, I want to say a few words about the team that we've built at this company, because when I started at VMS Software, and Johan showed it in his slide, I was the only non-American employee at the company. And now we are a truly multinational company. We have offices worldwide. We're in Boston, Copenhagen, Athens, Yerevan in Armenia. We're in New Zealand. We have an office in Egypt as a company, but we don't do any VMS work there yet, I say. We have people in different places who work from home. And these are just some of the languages that all of these people speak. And I think we have at least someone from each of our offices here today, with the exception of Greece. But sorry, not the exception of Greece, the exception of Egypt. Sorry. And without this team, there is simply no future for OpenVMS. Our workforce in the US that we started with, of course, is where our font of knowledge is. It's people who have decades of experience, not just with software engineering, but often with VMS in particular. And for us, it's not easy to hire new talent in the US. In the US, we compete against the likes of Apple, Google, Microsoft, and that just makes it tough. So we have been shifting our focus more towards Europe, where we're growing up teams. And a lot of the developers who start in those teams don't have a lot of prior experience to OpenVMS. In many cases, they have no experience at all. But we have found that by investing in creating relationships between the people from different offices, from different countries, different nationalities, we can facilitate sharing of knowledge. And we do that in a few different ways. We do it by inviting our US engineers, for instance, to come over to a place like Athens or a place like Yerevan. And if they want, they can bring their wife, have a bit of vacation as well, and just teach what they know, prepare some slides, but most of all, have lunch, have dinner with the people there, get to know each other so that we get a level of confidence where the people who are new are not afraid to ask questions because they know the people they're asking those questions of. We also organize something called a hackathon. where we have it's like a game where you pitch an idea for something new. And it can be for any of the TerraCloud products, because we run this corporate company-wide. But then these teams compete with against each other, first at a regional level, and then we organize this splendid midweek where we go to a gorgeous location close to one of our offices, and we compete there at like the worldwide level. And this is a great opportunity for people, not just from different countries, but also from different teams, different disciplines. We also want there to be like a business case component to that, so people from account management may be involved in some of these projects. And of course, we organize events like these, and now we're organizing the bootcamp not only in the United States, but we're also doing it in Europe once a year, so that our European engineers also get that exposure to the customer base, to consultants, to ISVs, to learn not just how the code works on the inside of the OS, which is fascinating by itself, but to also learn about how our customers, how ISVs, what solutions are built on VMS, how it's being used in the wild, so to speak. And being able to take that insight and marry it to what you see in the code and realize, yeah, CRTL, it's got some rough edges, but there's a lot of customer applications that have come to depend on those rough edges. So we may want to be careful in smoothing those rough edges over and make sure we do it in such a way that we don't break customer code. Okay, so looking back a little bit, when the company started 11 years ago, nearly 11 years ago now, we knew that we had one thing that we absolutely had to do, and that was to port OpenVMS to the x86 platform. Because the only two platforms that, well, three if you count VEX, but the two platforms that a lot of customers were running VEX or OpenVMS on were really dead platforms, because HPE had not only announced the end of life of OpenVMS, it had also announced the end of sales and end of support for Itanium. So that made our life easy as a company. We had one goal. We just needed to figure out how to do it and then go through the mechanics of doing it. So if you had walked into our office we started not in Bolton, but we moved to Bolton pretty quickly. But if you walked into our Bolton office these days, you would be hard pressed to find anyone in the company who was not a software engineer. And you wouldn't find anyone of those software engineers who was not working on getting to x86. Well, not entirely true. Some of the people were working on setting up the infrastructure to make that possible, of course. But then reality set in, and we found we cannot take 5 years to port to x86 and leave our customers hanging for that period of time, because there were still bugs that were being found in alpha and Itanium versions. There were still new features that customers desperately needed to be able to interact with the world in a meaningful manner. Just as an example that I was personally involved in, we found that there was a need to port Java 8 to OpenVMS on Integrity. So Brett and I took a year off from doing a lot of work on x86 because the foundational work was done. And Brett and I took a year to port Java 8 to Itanium. We found that, unlike what we set out in the beginning, I remember there was a big sign that said no alpha on Claire Brown's door. We found that that was not a tenable position, because a lot of our customers were on alpha and had no plans of going to the dead platform Itanium for a few years in hopes that they could then from there move to x86. They wanted to wait for x86 on alpha and then go straight across. It's what I would have done if I would have been in that position, because the alpha is a really nice architecture, and I won't speak about the other one. So we had other projects going on besides the port, of course. And since we were developing things and we found that HPE was slow, HPE support wasn't all it used to be, we of course needed to have a support team. And we needed to start offering professional services for customers who couldn't figure things out on themselves, that weren't necessarily support, but where we could step in with the knowledge that we had. So we started building those teams. We needed a professional account management team with a worldwide presence who really interacts with our customers, not just trying to sell things, because you sell something and you can try to sell as much as you can and get as much out of it. You're left with a customer who's paid too much, who maybe got some stuff that you sold him that they didn't really need, and they'll never come buy anything from you again. So our account management team is all about engagement with our customers, meeting them where they are, finding out what their needs are, and then figuring out how we can match those needs. So as the company was like becoming this stack of pebbles piled one on top of another, we really needed to figure out what direction do we need to take VMS engineering in. Now that the port to x86 is pretty much done, almost done, what are we going to focus on? Because what we were really lacking was a clear strategy and a clear sense of direction in terms of what are we going to do in VMS engineering. We would have customers who would come to us with all their questions. And typically those questions would come to account management because they were the ones engaging with the customers. And they would come with questions like, hey, could I run this using IBM hardware? Or could you add this particular feature to the software? Or could we change the behavior of this to do it a little bit more like the way I'm used to? And there was really no good place for those questions to go to. They would go to account management, and account management would say, okay, well, who knows something about this? Well, the software engineers. You ask the software engineer the question, could you add feature XYZ to your software? Guess what the answer is going to be most of the time? Probably some form of yes. It could be a yes, but maybe yes, but it would take 3 years and we couldn't work on anything else. Or yes, but other customers might not be happy with that. Yes, but it could be very expensive. Or yes, but we would need to have all this equipment in our lab to properly test it. So we found that those kinds of answers to customers' questions were not really useful. Yes, but it's not on our roadmap was a thing that came up often. So by answering questions that way, you just raise a whole lot more questions. Yes, we could theoretically do that. Okay, what does that answer mean? Does that mean you are going to do that? Well, we don't know. We might. Okay, we might. What does that mean? So as a result, and also at times we did have a roadmap from the very beginning, which we published on our website and which at times was overly ambitious. And we promised things, put dates on them that weren't always achievable and sometimes were way beside the mark. When we set out to port OpenVMS to x86, one of the ideas was that this is a great time to fix everything else that we've always complained about. Things like, why is the file system only 2 terabytes in size? Which was, of course, an incredible amount of incredible size when the VAX came out, but today, not so much. We want to fix network performance. We want to fix this and this and this. And we put all these things on our roadmap, and we ended up not doing all that. And in a way, we let some of our customers down, and we've come to realize that we need a much better process for putting things on our roadmap, for letting our customers know what it is that we are going to do so that they can build their plans based on what we tell them that our plan is. And of course, the number one requirement for that is that our plans are realistic and that our R&D efforts are in sync with what we say our plans are. And that's why we've established the product organization. So the product organization consists of Daria, our CEO, and we may, of course, extend this in the future. We have some plans to add more people to this team. It won't happen overnight, but we will probably do that. So Daria, of course, as the CEO, she sets the strategic direction for the entire company. She sets our goals in terms of revenue, what we want to achieve. And then it's up to us to fill in some of the details. So Nikita, is Nikita in the room today? Maybe he's also caught up in the bad traffic. So Nikita is a product manager. He's responsible for pretty much everything I'm not responsible for, which includes layered products, a lot of open source software. We have lots of open source offerings, and he's responsible for maintaining relationships with our ISVs, partners, ambassadors. And Nikita does a lot of the things like when our website needs updating, I can figure out what I want it to be on there, but I'm really clumsy in actually doing it. Nikita is really good with all of those tools. He really comes from a product management background, and he's really good at like maintaining the product platform and things like that. So I rely on for a lot of things like that on him. And then my job as chief architect and strategist is to set the direction for product development in general. The architect part of it means that I have a say in how we implement things when it comes to the operating system itself, because I feel that it's important that there's some consistency there. If time management works in a certain way when you're using NTP or when you're using, God forbid, DTSS, then we want it to work the same way if you now synchronize time to, say, a host when you're running in a virtual machine. So that sort of consistency is important. That's the architect part of it. And then the strategist part is that I talk a lot to like sales, support, customers themselves, go to events like these and talk with you to figure out what it is that our customers need. And what our customers need is not always the same as what our customers ask for. When our customers asked for, we want to run on Dell, and can you please support this Dell Fibre Channel card? They were not asking for Dell Fibre Channel drivers. They were asking for us to make it not matter what platform they ran on. They wanted to have that choice. We could have developed the Fibre Channel driver for Dell, and then the customers would have had 2 choices, HPE or Dell. But it would have set back our plans to get to iSCSI. I keep coming back to this example because it's such a good one, I think. And with iSCSI, you can choose whatever you want. So I get to make strategic decisions like that. And then I go to sales and I tell them, we're going to try telling customers no. for a change. And in general, that goes over pretty well if you have a good story to explain it. And then I also have like, so my real responsibilities are the operating system itself, the network stack, and some like closely related products like OpenSSH, OpenSSL, and then the world of compilers. So by having that strategy, we provide a sense of direction to the entire organization that matches with the business objectives that Daria has set for us. We gather requirements through various channels to come up with a list of priorities. What is really important, what is in line with those corporate directions. And then based on that and based on conversations with engineering on how long do you think it's going to take to implement this? How much time would it be to test that? What resources would be involved and what other projects are those resources involved in? We try to come up with a roadmap that we consistently maintain and that's realistic. And still sometimes we mess up, as I'll show you a little bit later today. And then we make sure that we maintain control of what's happening. We make sure that R&D engineering knows what our objectives are, what our priorities are, what is on the roadmap, what is not, what is on the horizon, so that everything that our R&D organization does is conducive to delivering on that roadmap. And then when we take all that, we have the tools to give our sales team insight, to give our customers the clarity that they need to base their plans on our plans. So some of the technical directions, keywords to us are retaining. OpenVMS will always be OpenVMS. If we were to turn it upside down, turn it into some kind of Linux, our customers would go elsewhere because that's not what they make that investment in. So at the same time, we're going to adapt. The world around us, the technical ecosystem around OpenVMS is changing all the time. Practices that were considered secure 30 years ago may not be considered secure anymore today. The ways applications on different platforms interface with each other has changed over the last 30 years. We want to fit in with your existing infrastructure and application landscape. If you're taking your IT environment to the cloud, we want to fit into that environment. And we want to enable our customers to port applications, whether they're coming from VAX, Alpha, or Integrity, and migrating to OpenVMS on x86, or if they want to take some open source component that allows their application on OpenVMS to interface with the rest of the application landscape, we want to also make it possible to port those types of components from Linux or from another Unix to OpenVMS on x86. And then finally, of course, we're dedicated to delivering improvements to the operating system, to performance, to platform support, to our documentation, to the user experience on OpenVMS, and the application developer experience. So hopefully we're living up to those standards that we've set for ourselves. And hopefully we'll get better at it as we progress and as we get like more established. So just a few areas where we want to make improvements. Software development. we know that we need to make some improvements in C and C++. Lots of those components that we want to be able to port from the open source community are written in C and C++, and they're often written for Linux, and often it takes some tweaking to get our CRTL to do the right thing. And there are reasons for that. There are reasons why there is no good equivalent of fork on OpenVMS. It just does not fit VMS's way of dealing with I/O and OpenFlow and things like that. Our IDE and our debugger, we want to improve our development and debugging experience in OpenVMS. We want to improve documentation for software development, so we're working on some porting guides. Brett Cameron just released a document that goes into some of like the things that you run into when you port software to OpenVMS, or when you port software coming from older platforms to x86. We're also working on a guide to porting privileged code. I'll have a session later today about porting privileged code, where I'll go into some of the things that will eventually make their way into that document. And we want to improve the compatibility for porting software from Linux to OpenVMS, but in such a way that it does not break compiling everything that was written for OpenVMS itself, of course. When it comes to storage, we want to add support for some more modern fiber channel controllers. I already talked about that yesterday. I'll talk about it again today when it comes to platform choices, but we're adding support for HPE Gen 11 hardware and the 32 gigabit fiber channel adapters that are the only ones that work there. ESXi and KVM, we want to be compatible with that. So we're offering VM Direct Path IO and PCI pass-through on those platforms. We're working towards iSCSI, which is a storage protocol that runs over TCP rather than utilize some proprietary hardware that will allow us to have shared storage in a cluster, even in the cloud, if you would want that. And on x86, currently, we lack the capability to use a cluster common system disk. It's a long story why that's not supported, but it's a really bad idea to try it anyway. Data corruption is the key word here. But we do want to add support for that, just like we have it on Alpha and on Itanium. And we're working on making that possible. But it's not going to be done overnight. Networking, we want to refresh our TCP/IP kernel, because we found that the fact that the networking code in OpenVMS, the kernel of the TCP/IP stack, is 20-year-old code taken from True64 Unix, a BSD Unix. The fact that that code is 20-year-old is really hindering us, because some of the parts that modern network stacks have in their kernel are missing for us. So if we want to implement more modern network protocols, more secure network protocols, we often find that the kernel is lacking support for that. And so what we've decided to do is we're looking at current BSDs, and we've identified FreeBSD as the one that's pretty much the most compatible with OpenVMS, and sort of the cradle that we've built inside OpenVMS to support a BSD style network stack. And we're porting that. And then when we're doing that, we can support more modern and more secure protocols. Things like iSCSI, NFS version 4, modern secure SMTP. The TCP/IP kernel fresh will enable us to implement those protocols. We're working on OpenSSH. The version we're currently working on is version 9.9-2. And last year, when I was in Boston at the Bootcamp, I said that we would deliver OpenSSH version 9 around June of this year. And this is one of those cases where our planning was not what it should have been. Realism has set in now, and we realize that it's a larger task than we thought. Some of the main reason for that is that handling file names using a protocol that originates in the Unix world and then coming to OpenVMS with the expectation to handle both Unix-style path names and VMS-style path names, sometimes in really strange combinations, taking into account logical names, search lists, which is a concept totally foreign to Unixes. It was just not feasible to deliver this in use. So we're still doing it. We're working on it really hard. We have just delivered a very limited test version to one of our clients who really needed to start testing right now with it. But it's not going to be June. It's going to be announced. Important to note, we're deprecating support for DSA, also known as SSH DSS, which is the non-RSA-V mechanism, encryption mechanism for OpenSSH. That's the default mechanism older versions of VMS use. And so we're deprecating it. It doesn't mean it's gone away, but you will have to enable it manually if you still need it, and try to get rid of it. Try to remove anything that depends on it, because with SSH version 10, it is completely gone from the code base. The OpenSSH project started deprecating this protocol 11 years ago. It's time to move on, and it's time for us to move on as well, which is why we're doing this. And then we want to implement either IPsec or WireGuard, or possibly both, so that you can easily encrypt any kind of TCP/IP traffic, not just secure protocols. This would make it possible, for instance, to run DECnet over IP in a secure way. It would maybe even allow us to encrypt cluster communications. If it doesn't allow that, then we'll find another way to do that, because that's another thing we want to do. On the OS side, work on performance is ongoing. This will always be an issue. We want better coordination with the hypervisor. I talked about synchronizing time to the hypervisor. Our Greek team was given that as a first project for them to work on. And some people in the company had some trepidation, like we're really throwing those guys who are brand new to OpenVMS into the deep end. But they just did a technology demonstrator that showed us that they can actually do this. And now we're working on how are we going to integrate that? How are we going to make it work in a way that's consistent with, for instance, using NTP or using DTSS. So this is coordination with the hypervisor, timekeeping, being able to, like, in the hypervisor, shut down the system and have OpenVMS shut down before the VM powers off. We can do that in KVM. We're not doing it in ESXi yet, but again, the Greek team has stepped up and showed us that they can figure out how to do that. And then really interesting, maybe in the future, if we can do it, is dynamic resizing. If you're running in the cloud, there are ways to, like, dynamically add memory to a system. How great would it be if OpenVMS, if it's like end of month batch job processing and you want to load a whole lot of database records into memory, which you normally don't do, you just re-provision your VM on the fly to have extra memory, maybe a few extra CPUs. VMS runs with that, and then you take it away again, and VMS scales back down again. This is something I'm dreaming of. We haven't done any kind of feasibility study into this, so don't get your hopes up. But if there's a way to do it, we'll find it. Modern system management, we're working on tools like Web UI and VMS SPI. And then security. Stack smashing protection is something that we're going to put into our compilers. We want to have a better password hash. We also want to have encrypted cluster communications. Both of those would break compatibility with the cluster protocol, meaning once we do that, it's going to be VSI clusters, VSI nodes only in a cluster, no more backwards compatibility with HPE versions of OpenVMS. So we want to be really careful about how and when we do that. And we're also working on secure boot and code signing of all the kernel components so that you can be assured that whatever VMS loads into memory as part of its executive hasn't been tampered with by anyone. So I'm going to finish with just a few highlights of our roadmap. First thing to come up is update 2 for VMS 923. The main thing, the new thing there is support for Gen 11 and 32 gigabit fiber channel cards. That's the SN1600Q and the SN1610Q, to be precise. Support for fiber channel pass-through on Red Hat KVM. And we'll add Oracle KVM once we've figured out how to do it there. Bug fixes and performance improvements, as always. Then OpenSSH 992 talked about that, partial redesign, some bug fixes, more up-to-date standards. At some point, we're going to have compilers where the backend is built natively, LLVM, and where LLVM will be a newer version. John's talked about that. And then what I'm really excited about is what we're doing around OpenVMS 924 and TCP/IP version 7. The two go hand in hand. TCP/IP version 7 brings us the new network stack from FreeBSD. And then VMS 924 will make use of that to offer iSCSI support. And those are really like the two main features in those versions. We want to go to field test with that in December of this year. And then we want to take a longer field test period so that you can actually deploy this, get some feedback from customers who are actually running this with iSCSI. The cost of entry for iSCSI, if you're like doing it in a test environment, is really low. You don't need any dedicated hardware. Any Unix server or even a Windows server with some software on it can be an iSCSI target, so serving disks to a VMS cluster. So you really don't need anything special to experiment with that, but it may take some time to set up. So we really want to take that time for the field test so that our customers can test this. And also so that if they find something like a month after we've gone into field test, that we can release like a second or maybe even a third field test kit where we've already fixed some of those issues so that we can get on with like testing beyond that point. I'm really excited about the future. I hope you are too. And if there are any questions, I think I have a few minutes left. Any questions? Yes.
In terms of migrating of Alpha and Integrity, why did you make the decision not to do any kind of executable limit translation tool facility?
We had plans for a binary translator, but it was part of that trying to solve everything all at once. We simply don't have the engineering. The size of our engineering team didn't allow us to do that. We started on it, but we abandoned it. Yeah, it was a tough choice. Anyone else? All right. In that case, I guess I've been crystal clear. Thank you all for attending, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.